This episode of Total Network Operations is brought to you by Catchpoint. Catchpoint is an internet performance monitoring platform that gives you visibility into everything that impacts your applications from the end user's experience and perspective, giving you outside in visibility. It's the platform for internet plumbers. Catchpoint provides internet performance monitoring, IPM, which is observability for your internet stack. Catchpoint does all this with telemetry from the world's largest, most diverse observability network. It helps us plumbers in enterprise IT, DevOps, IT ops, and all sorts of NetOps teams find incident root cause and identify blind spots. This means improved mean time to resolution by monitoring from where your users are. Total Network Operations listeners can explore the Catchpoint platform today at catchpoint.com/totalnetops. That's catchpoint.com/totalnetops. Now, let's get to the show. Welcome to Total Network Operations, the project with a podcast dedicated to hardworking network operators like you who deliver all the packets. We have conversations with operators and vendors about their great ideas in NetOps so you can make informed decisions for your network and your team, and to spur constructive dialogue between vendors, NetOps teams, and across the community in general. I'm your host, Scott Robon. Now, you know that I'm always looking for operators that are willing to talk about tangible issues they're working through in NetOps. And we have a great guest lined up for today's conversation. Our focus today will be Lumen Technologies' philosophy of network management and their journey to AI ops and advanced network orchestration. To dive into this, we have a real leader in our industry, Greg Freeman, VP of Network and Customer Transformation at Lumen, where he spearheads network automation, orchestration, and AI strategy, guiding the highest technical tier in operations and championing NetDevOps methodologies. So, Greg, there are quite a few friends of mine that have been telling me that I need to meet you and I need to talk with you. And when I figured out we were both at NANOG in Atlanta back in February 25, and we connected there, I knew right away that I wanted to get you on Total Network Operations. So thanks for being here. Tell us about yourself, what led to your role at Lumen, and how you got into automation and orchestration.
Well, thanks, Scott. It's great to be here. I always enjoy discussing some of the thoughtful, innovative things that the industry is doing. So appreciate you having me on. So yeah, at Lumen, I've been here for a little over 20 years now. So I started back in the industry in the dot-com boom with WorldConf. Remember?
Sure.
Good old
Oh,
WorldConf.
I do. Yep.
Yep. Both infamous, but great experience. Moved on to another company in engineering that was called Ascend or Lucent Technologies on a lot of
Sure.
the
Yep.
ATM frame relay type stuff. And then after that stint, went into Lumen. And so Lumen at the time, Lumen's a company of acquisitions. So it was Global Crossing. And so I ran some of our customer facing teams, some of our NOCs, some of our planning organizations. And then more recently, I have the operation engineers that do some of the automation and orchestration. So been working on that, effectively just taking our network engineers and changing the way we're doing business. Instead of being thoughtful of having engineers telnet or SSH into gear, we want to automate and orchestrate it. So we started on that journey just a little bit before COVID, a little before in earnest, before 2020. And so been doing that and just thrilled to be doing it and glad to be here.
Very cool. So you're 5-ish years into the journey at this point.
Yeah, we started maybe a couple of years earlier. We started
Okay.
with some robotic process automation and
Okay.
some of that lower. It's good. You can get some benefit out of RPAs, but we really got more into the orchestration and the deeper net DevOps of pivoting our org about 5 years ago.
Before we dive into that, I missed that you actually spent some time on the vendor side. And I was actually a Cascade Ascend customer for a
Oh,
time with their
yeah,
the ATM switches at Bell Atlantic. So we're dating ourselves here.
that's
But
right. That's right.
yeah, but
ATM when it was cool, I'm going to roll everything and
that's right,
got rolled into MPLS, but a lot of good learnings from that. I really enjoyed it,
for sure.
especially with how MPLS and RSVPTE and some of those protocols rolled out. It was really helpful for me there. So enjoyed
Yeah.
that. That's been
If
great.
you came from an ATM perspective, MPLS wasn't. I mean, it made sense to you.
Right.
It also brought complexity into IP that necessarily we didn't really think about. But that's
Yeah,
another conversation on another
that's right.
podcast.
All right. No, that's great. I love RSVPTE and I love the
Yes.
capabilities there. We've done some cool stuff. I'd love to share that too. But yeah. Very good.
Well, cool. Let's see where that comes up in the workflow or task automation somewhere here.
Oh,
But
sure. Yeah, yeah.
so you couch this as the Lumen's journey into closed network automation and driving AI ops. Let's put some
That's right.
definitions to those terms. Like when you say closed loop, what does that
Yeah.
mean to you? And how do you define AI ops? Take them in any order
Yeah.
you want.
So let's go with the closed loop automation because that's really where we began. In 2020, we had our first set of engineers out. I'm here in Phoenix, and we said we're going to develop and we're going to aspire to have 80% of all of our interactions with our network be machine to machine driven by 2025.
Okay.
And to accomplish that, we're going to have a platform as a service that does a lot of heavy network orchestration with this closed loop mentality. Some people call that zero touch, closed
Hmm.
loop, no humans needed. But the thought process in closed loop to us was taking one complex business algorithm and having it done completely with a machine and a computer
Hmm.
without a human intervention needed or human touch needed. So that was our aspiration of how we would define closed loop or zero touch, if you will.
And that was from the start. Like you set that as a bogey. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you're going to talk about steps on how to get there. Like what did it take and
Right.
so
Yeah,
forth. Yeah.
yeah, we did set that. And candidly, we didn't even have a measurement at that point. We didn't know where our
Sure.
starting journey was. So it's like, well, we think 80, that sounds right. And we think
Okay.
it's feasible, but we've got to get a lot of measurements out. And so we did behave more of a startup. Now, as part of that, too, on the definition of AI and where that plays in,
Hmm.
as I mentioned, we'd started before this with RPAs, and we'd looked
Right.
at a few different technologies and what technologies do we think will add value. And so, machine learning, even at that time, was maybe not as big as today, but machine learning more so than the specific AI ops strategy
Sure.
was where we'd look. So for when we brought everyone out, we said, all right, it's going to be more machine learning, more machine intelligence. We'll use it to feed into our orchestration, and over time, we'll have this massive system that rules it all. So our number one focus was orchestration, and then as machine learning and AI have evolved a bit, or AI has evolved more, that's been more of a secondary parallel journey we've been going on. So how do we take our AI machine learning and empower all these workflows that we're talking about?
I do think it's easy to get caught up in the recent hype, that's
Right.
all fueled by, Chat GPT and the chat tools that came available. But as computational techniques, machine learning and other AI mechanisms have been around for a long time,
They have.
and certainly got into certain tools. And there is a level at which, as an end user, you almost don't care what's being used underneath the surface as long as it's effective. I could be using statistical regression, right?
That's right.
Um, but what did what did orchestration look like to you at the outset? Again, if we say 2017, 2018, 2019, what was your vision for orchestration?
Yeah, for orchestration, I was a little naive. So we looked at a few different vendors, and so they have this canvas. And so with the workflow, the way it works is you have that canvas, and it looks like a business flow chart or a coding flow chart. You have a start, you have an end, and then you have all these if then coding logic in the middle.
And this is RPA you're talking about specifically?
Well, even that with
Okay.
orchestration, so it can be
Okay.
either RPA or even some of our more advanced orchestrators we have today.
Okay.
And so the vision, naively for me, was that I would have all my network engineers. If we did a planned activity, we would put all of our mops inside of this workflow canvas. And if there's a problem, they won't be logging into the gear anymore. They're going to log into the workflow canvas and start
Okay.
manipulating things on the fly. And it's a low code solution, so we can retrain everybody to do that. Well, we started with RPA just with some simple macros. And what we found very quickly was yeah, you don't have to have as much of a development skill set, but that coding is very fragile and they were
Hmm.
breaking a lot. And so we figured out okay, RPA, while we can get some good value out of that for low level tasks, we've got to get to a more sophisticated workflow. And
Okay.
so when we moved to the next one, that was more API and we wanted to use Ansible to talk to our network elements.
Sure.
And so it's like, okay, that's the one we're going to go to. Then you figure out, that's a little more complex than maybe what low code I was thinking. So
We're
pretty
looking for somewhere in
naive.
between. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. A little naive there, but it was good. It was a learning that we had, and we finally got it moving on.
We've danced around workflow here,
Yeah.
and let's drill on that just a little bit
Sure.
here. You
Right.
know,
Right.
to automate anything and then orchestrate it, I have to define what the thing is. Like, what are the
Sure.
steps? And I've kind of developed this view in the last couple of years that most shops don't think explicitly about workflow. And like, we have mops, you might, and
Yeah.
telcos and carriers have a tradition of
Right.
having a method of procedure document, right?
Right. Back
But
out doc, all of the
that's
if.
right.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
know, if we're halfway through and we're not halfway done, time to back the truck up, right?
Right.
Um, did you rely on mops for your initial workflow definition, or how did you think about workflow in terms of identifying what tasks were being done in the network?
Yeah, so when we started, we didn't have any good measurement for that 8%, as I mentioned. We brought in a number of engineers, and we first started to look at what are our employee skill set and how do we
Hmm.
get them thinking a little bit with that naive vision of, okay, you're going to be going in the canvas and doing things. But we created some working group areas early on. And
Okay,
one of the working group areas we put in was workflow development.
sure,
And so for the first 2 years, well, not quite two, for over the first year, the thought was I needed to give the employees cultural wins for the workflow. So I let them say, what are some of the problems
sure.
that you're dealing with, and what would you like to do? So as they started to put some of those solutions, some of them started to look at automation, and some of them were a little more orchestration. But typically, I think of an automation orchestration. You can think of the old song conductor, and you bring in the band, and you bring in
Sure.
some drums and all that. I think of it slightly different. I think of it more of like Henry Ford with the assembly line.
Yep.
And so as he's building the Model T, there could be, or a little more modern, you have one orchestration that puts the wheel on the car. And then you have another automation that might put the lug nuts in. And then you have
Sure.
another automation that puts the windshield in. If you put all those together, that's an orchestration. That's a
Yep.
workflow.
Yeah.
And so just some of those basic concepts of that, you can get very, very detailed on. Okay, you've got one automation that does this, but think bigger picture, and getting the engineers to think that bigger picture, just not a mop. That's great. But there's
Right.
all these things you have to do. You have to communicate to your customers, both internally and externally. You have to have ticketing, and you have to update that documentation. You have
Yep.
alarming. Do you need to suppress those alarms or collapse them? If there's problems, you have to go out and perhaps get spares, and there may be another system for that. So while any single one of those things can be an automation, an orchestration takes all of those into consideration.
Sure.
So first year, that was the thought. Let the working group area define some of those automation and orchestrations, and we'll learn together and move them forward to give the team some wins.
So, and what kind of reactions did you get from the team? And I'm gonna throw some specifics at you. Like,
Yeah,
I think there's always the worry about, well, automation's going to take my
get my
job
job.
away.
You got it.
That's
Yeah,
an obvious one, right? But there
please.
are also factors like, um, for workflow definition. It's like, are you telling me that there's only one way to do this, and you're going to take
Yeah,
away my creativity?
right.
Did you run into that at all? If so, how did you manage that? Like, I feel like there's probably got to be a mix of, there should be a standard way to do it. If somebody is innovative and comes up with a better way to do it, you leave room for that too.
That's right. Yeah. So what we did, I'll go back to 2020. That's when, so we'd had a few years of maybe proof of concepts and some lower level type things. In 2020, we pulled out our first couple dozen engineers that we thought would be a good fit for this. And we put some guard rules down. We said, look, we appreciate that maybe some of you still have some expect scripts running,
Sure.
spec scripts.
Yep.
We appreciate the Perl has served you well, or Bash, but we're going to start moving forward as our espoused in the target. We want to use more Ansible. We want to use more YAML. We
Hmm.
want Python. Ansible is based off the Python stack. So we want you to do that. We're going to start putting this in Jira. And at the time, that was brand new for the team.
Sure.
And so we said, here's how we're going to document Jira. we set some standards on, we're going to start using GitLab. And at the time, that was new for us as well.
Right.
And so there were some effectively non-negotiables. But other than that, it's like, look, all of you are the subject matter experts. So you come up with a solution that is bothering you that you think this would fit into
Sure.
and start coding it. And so the thought was give those engineers some sweat equity because it's now their creation, not mine or someone else's on the team. And we always had a saying, I assume you're a father, right, Scott?
I am four adult kids. Yep.
Four adult kids. And so when your kids were maybe 1 year old, how beautiful was your child?
They're absolutely beautiful. Of course.
Of course, right. So if I looked at your kid and I didn't see any pictures, would I say that is the ugliest baby I've ever seen?
You might say that about any one of my kids. Yep.
Yeah, I
Yep.
can't do that. I wouldn't do that, right? So
Roger.
the thought was you can't call someone's baby ugly.
Yeah.
And so the thought was, okay, we acknowledge there are some ugly babies in the world, but we're not going to call them ugly. And so how do we get the employees to take some of these non-negotiables, begin to create their own baby, if you will, and it will be the most beautiful baby in the world to them. Now, to the other side of your comment, yeah, there were some people who would say, look, the scripts I've got have been working great for the last decade.
Sure.
You're just wasting my time.
Mm-hmm.
In not so many words. That's typically what they would say.
Sure.
And so what some of the people we brought in, we said, look, this is the way we're moving forward. If you want to continue to do things the way you're doing, we still need those skill sets. But this is over the next number of years how things are going to go. And so we did implement some psychological safety. We would pull engineers into the program and we would ask them to do a certain percentage of their time using these techniques. And then if they didn't and said this isn't for them, fine, you can go back doing what you were, but this is the way we're moving forward. So part of it was giving them cultural wins, letting them have their own babies, if you will, setting up some guardrails, and then giving the team some safety, psychological safety on this is the way we're moving. But if you don't want to be a part of it, we still got tons of work to do in the here and now.
And that seems like really practical wisdom, right? Where you had a clear direction. You weren't just saying, hey, help us decide the direction. You're saying that this is the way we're going to go. But within that framework or within those guardrails, let people help solve problems in the direction that you wanted to take, you collectively wanted to take the organization. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And even with some of those that we dictated, there was still a healthy debate between GitHub and GitLab.
Sure.
And
Are you still on GitLab, or did you go to GitHub?
We use a little both, in fairness. So we use GitLab. We have runners set up. We used to use Jenkins, and so it made our deployments we wanted to be thoughtful about how we could have a robust CI/CD pipeline, and we could push things. We did set up, and we didn't exactly know this on day one, but we figured out you want to have your dev, your test, your stage, and your prod developments.
Yep.
And then you have all these different things. And so how can we get away from every couple of weeks releasing code to being able to say, I want to push any automation or orchestration right now and have everything in place. So GitLab helped us with that. Now GitHub, it's got some cool stuff in Copilot. And I'm sure GitLab will probably get there too. But for documentation for newer users, that's pretty cool. Yeah. And part of this internal Lumen uses GitHub, but so we're running a bit of a hybrid there. But
Roger, I do quite a bit of federal government work, and GitLab is very popular because of private instances, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think, as far as I know, GitHub is all cloud-based, nothing private at this point. So
yeah. But even with that, I mean, I have seen a shift from some of our federal entities where you can have a secure cloud instance.
Okay.
So while there are some security ramifications and thought there, I would say that the standards are getting better by the cloud providers, and some of the government entities are getting a little better too.
Yeah, I know there's a whole set of activities around getting government services in cloud and FedRAMP and all sorts of other certification programs to do so. Yeah,
you got it.
Before we move away from the people issues, so I don't want to jump too far ahead, but since you've been doing this for a while and you had the core group that you started with, I'm sure you've had to cycle some people in like over the course, like now it's 2025.
Yeah.
What kind of continuous learning or new things you look for and bringing new people onto the automation and orchestration team? What do you do on that front?
Yeah, I should have done a little more into that. So with the employees that we started with those 2 dozen, and we had a debate up front. Do you rip out everybody from their current engineering task and make them
Sure.
100% dedicated, or do you go with a federated model? And so with the federated, it says, okay, today you're maybe an operations engineer who works in the IP space or the
Hmm.
West Side Layer 1 transport space or Metro. How do we just rip them out and say, now you're going to be doing all orchestration? We didn't feel that was pragmatic, and we thought we would get more cultural pushback against that. So we did set up a small team of dedicated engineers that was 80 to 100% of their time working on the platforms, the orchestration, everything like that. But then we put in a governance model where we said anyone in the org, and I've got a couple hundred engineers. That time I had 400 engineers in the org.
Wow.
Any of you who want to be in as part of this program, we'll cycle you through. So we had part of it was YouTube videos. We would
Sure.
decide here's the YouTube videos you need to watch, and then part of it was detailed training that we would have on some more advanced topics, and we would give them a week worth of training, and then we would cycle them through a month long process, and we would say, okay, you're now certified to work on our platform. We were thinking of it as a PaaS, a platform as a service.
Hmm.
And so when we put those people through, every every month we were cycling new people into the program. And if they went through it and said, yeah, this isn't for me, that's fine. We appreciate you at least getting the education and knowing what we're building. And as you're doing your day-to-day job today, just be mindful that how we can add things to our orchestrated platform, even if you're not doing it. Um, so we've continued to cycle people through. We've seen no shortage. So we've run a few hundred people through our
Wow.
program.
Cool. So that's another really interesting organizational note, right? Where
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but those people who want to hang on to their Perl scripts or actually
Yeah.
want nothing to do with automation, it sounds like you actually tolerate that. And like you, yes and
Yeah,
no.
yeah,
Okay,
yes and no. Yeah, I
okay,
think that's right. I mean, do we tolerate that? Yeah, they're still doing it, but what we've seen over time, a lot of those skeptics early on, to your point, some people are like, "Oh, this is going to take my job." Not had a few of those,
yeah,
but not too many of them.
sure,
The bigger challenge was we've been doing this for the last 10 years. We've got a disk script. We've got
yep,
this isn't going to do anything. But as we've started pushing out more workflows and demonstrating what we're doing, then the light bulb comes on. It's like, wow, you can do a lot more with
yeah,
that. And that's the broader ecosystem. If you go back to the car example in the Henry Ford, when automation puts on the wheel,
right,
everybody, if they're in the same paths, they're building the car. They may not
sure,
know it. They may just
right,
be working on their small, hey, I'm working on the engine block or I'm working on the axle moving in on. All of them are building this massive orchestrated car.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, do we tolerate it? Yeah, I'd say we tolerate it to a point. We're more lenient than we are restrictive there. But
hmm,
over time, as people have seen the value, it's become less and less on those older scripts. Yeah.
that's pretty cool, right? And where you let people experience it versus just having a mandate pushed down. Like that's what you would hope to see, right? Real people will get the benefits of what you're trying to do over time, right? Whereas
Yeah.
if you enforce a mandate right away, you might get more than an equal and opposite reason from some
That's right.
folks. Yeah,
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 that's absolutely right. People have interesting ways of getting back at you.
that's
That's
right.
so,
Maybe we'll come back to that question later. Um,
yeah.
there's an outage discussion here.
Oh
Anyway,
yeah.
um,
Right.
but well, so you made some guesses at the start. You said let's set an 80% bogey.
Yeah.
You obviously had to set other KPIs over time and start
Sure.
collecting data. What did
Yep.
you once you got into the process? What did you find really useful to collect, and how did you set the right targets for those KPIs?
Yeah, I'd say that's still a journey. Our first 2 years, I haven't been part of a startup per se, but I
Hmm.
wanted to behave a little more like a startup.
Sure.
in that how what's our return on investment? We had to put a business case together to get all
Sure.
this going, obviously. um, I didn't mention that one single time to any of our engineers in the first
Interesting.
probably 2 years.
Okay.
And so again, it was more of that cultural win. And so when we threw out the 80%, it's like, yeah, we got to figure out how to measure that. uh,
Sure.
so we figured out how to measure that. And then we started measuring the number of workflows we had. And a workflow can be this big or it can be this big. And
Sure.
so we said, okay, we've got the number of workflows. Let's count the number of runs or executions of those workflows. And so if you look at all the automated tasks, there are millions of tasks that get run. But these workflows, since they're a complex business outcome that we wanted, we thought
Hmm.
that was a good measurement. And then we also wanted for the ROI to put in a dollar value for those. And this
Right.
is one I still don't advertise as much to most of the engineers. We'll talk about it occasionally. But I typically talk more about how many workflows we have, how many workflow executed runs we have. And then more recently, we've been talking about the number of new features or merges that we put into those workflows. So that's what we talk primarily to the engineers about. On the financial front, we came up with two ways to think through that. One is if I automate or orchestrate a complex task. If I did that task maybe once a year for however much my salary is, say it's $100, then okay, I saved the company $100 because I used to have a human do it one time and now I did.
Right.
However, now that I've got automation orchestration that never sleeps, 365
Sure.
and 74, I might decide to run that thing 100 times. Well, I didn't save the company 100 times my $100 and 10 grand,
Right.
but I did create more value.
Sure.
So we've got two metrics. We have one, and we're using for our analytic tool, just where we were at the time. And now we use Splunk. So we set up a Splunk
Sure.
repository to take that data in, and then I can see a value for the amount of OpEx saved. And then I also see one for the value add. So any work that I eliminated in that example, the one-time run, that's an OpEx dollar value saved. And then in the second example where I ran it 100 times, well, I created value 99 more times at $100. So I
Yeah.
can measure the how much value we've created for the network or the organization and how much dollars we've saved for the network. So
That
those are a
that
few. Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Number one, it reflects reality, right? Where some of them are really just saving time and effort.
Right.
Um, but that also provides the ability to create value, and capturing both separately, I think is really smart. I'm making sure we get all these down so they end up in the not just the recording, but also on the transcript that comes from this.
Oh,
It's good
right. Yeah,
takeaways.
cool.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, no, that's kind of interesting because you think about workflows. We just started initially. It's like, okay, we're going to get a few workflows, and by year two, we had like 16 workflows. Not we'll separate them. And so when you look at those numbers, it was like, well, okay, that's not a tremendous amount. But if you think about network outages,
Sure.
if one workflow runs one time and it prevents maybe a BGP route leak, uh,
Right.
versus a workflow that runs 100 times and execute mops, which one's more valuable to you?
Sure. Yeah.
Um, our network, we run through AS3356. You can go out to
Yep.
just Google world's largest or most interconnected ASNs, and you'll see the KD report. And 3356 has been there for almost 2 decades now. What happens when we have a route leak or a big problem on that network?
Sure.
We make the front page, or maybe not the front page, oh, not the front. We make the Wall Street Journal or some other news outlet, and it's not in a favorable light.
Yeah, not the headlines you want to attract.
That's
Correct.
right.
Yep.
And so it's like, well, how much value does maybe the BGP route leak orchestration does that save us? Well, we didn't make the news today, so is that worth a few million to you? Um,
Right.
those are the hard ones to quantify. So when you're preventing things from happening, that's where a lot of business cases break down.
Sure.
And so the thought was, well, we'll call some of that value add. And we know there's
Yeah.
other intangibles that all this is pulling in from a reliability and resiliency standpoint. Um, that's how we think a little bit about it.
Now, I know you're beyond 16 workflows today, and You've mentioned some statistics to me in the past. I don't know how far you want to go into that,
Yeah,
but you started with like being really collaborative with your first group of engineers and letting them get early wins.
that's right.
Have you moved toward okay, now we have a prioritization of workflows that we're working on automating and orchestrating? What does that prioritization process look like with regard to your ROI metrics? This episode of Total Network Operations is brought to you by Catchpoint. Catchpoint is an internet performance monitoring platform that gives you visibility into everything that impacts your applications from the end user's experience and perspective, giving you outside in visibility. It's the platform for internet plumbers, the term I've used on this show many times. Catchpoint performs internet performance monitoring, or IPM, providing observability for your internet stack. Catchpoint does all this with telemetry from the world's largest, most diverse observability network. That network contains thousands of locations across hundreds of countries and highly diverse locations, like cloud nodes at the source of applications, backbone and broadband nodes, and last mile locations where user experiences occur. The need for this type of monitoring was reinforced by Gartner's first ever Gartner Magic Quadrant for digital experience monitoring. Catchpoint helps us plumbers in enterprise IT, DevOps, IT ops, and all types of NetOps teams find incident root cause, as well as identify blind spots from the evolution of internet centric application delivery. In our distributed app world, we need to see the data from everywhere. This means improved mean time to resolution by monitoring from where your users are and less finger pointing. I spent a lot of time in one of my early NetOps jobs showing how it wasn't the network's fault. I really could have used tools like this to save me time and effort proving network innocence. Total Network Operations listeners can explore the Catchpoint platform today at catchpoint.com/totalnetops. That's catchpoint.com/totalnetops. I had a great conversation with the Catchpoint team in Total Network Operations episode 28. Give that episode a listen to hear much more about what they do. Thank you, Catchpoint, for your support of Total Network Operations. Let's get back to the show.
Yeah, it's still a little bit of both. We still have all the Jira intake dashboards on things that engineers want, but there are a number that we put in the mix as well that we see good value on.
Sure.
So, for example, we put in a few. They don't get tremendous amount of internal use, but OSI layer one transport, for example, we have to maintain our transport networks. So think of the various vendors, the Cienas, Infineras, Adva, Fuji, all of those different
Sure.
ones. And so we want to be able to add value to our customers. So we put in a couple of workflows that work and protect OSI layer one transport.
Sure.
Inside of network ops, if that rolls to protect, there may be a repair action needed. Once it's repaired, depending on our system, it doesn't auto revert. So customers will see higher latency on that protected path. So historically, they would call into our enterprise repair and say, hey, I've got higher latency. Help me figure out what's going on. Historically, what would we have to do? We'd have to have an engineer log into that device, figure out you're on protect, everything's now fixed.
Right.
Can you switch me back to work? Yeah, we can switch back. Can I do it right now? No, you can't do it right now. It's typically
Right.
what the customers would say. They would say, I've got my own internal. Some of them say, yeah, go for it because it's pretty quick. Others would say, no, you got to do it Saturday night. Others might say,
Right.
you got to do it Tuesday morning. And so
Right.
we would have to schedule an engineer to do that. And so what we did was we said, all right, why don't we just have one orchestration? It's all teal one on a lot of this transport.
Right.
Old school as that is, we still
I
use.
want to I want to poke on the optical gear versus routers, but keep going.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we orchestrated all those things, and now a customer, we would just put in the date and time, and it would just do it, update the ticket automatically. And then we said, well, why do we need to have an engineer do that or the customer call us? We love to talk to customers, but customers never call in when they're having a good day.
Right.
They
Exactly.
never
Hey,
do.
thank you. Thank you for keeping the internet up, Greg. I just wanted you to know today.
Thank you.
Yep.
You did great today. All right. You didn't make the Wall Street Journal. Good job.
No tickets ever have been opened for that. Right.
And so we thought, okay, just acknowledging that reality, let's move that feature to the portal. And so our customer portal, the customer can now log in. They can run a self-diagnostic tool. It looks at all the guardrails, and then they can set the date and time, and it just moves all that back. no human touch needed other than the customer. So no Lumen human needed. So that's an example of one orchestration that we put forward and we prioritized it. When you
Sure.
look internally, yes, we get in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small percentage of our work, but it is a percentage that we can now add value to our customers so they can self-serve, and it
Sure.
eliminates all that. So those are the type of ones
Yeah.
that we prioritize to get more in front of customers, or ones that just have really, really high level of effort for us so that we've got to burn through. Some of the workflows that we did prioritize early on were some of those preventive to effectively try to keep us off the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Sure. Right. Right.
Now, how many of those
Yeah.
do we get? We think we got a good set, but next time we don't, you'll probably read about it, and we'll work through the next orchestration there. But
Right.
we work
Right.
hard on staying off of that one.
For in terms of capturing value, like one of the things that you've hit on here a couple times is
Yeah,
now you don't need scheduled maintenance windows for many of these workflows.
that's right.
Um, and that there's a reduced burden there from like having to have so many scheduled maintenance windows. Have
Yeah,
you been able to characterize that as well? Have you captured that?
a little bit. So what we do is we have a we call it an ops review, and so
Sure.
historically we've done that for our different technologies on how those are running in the network. We have an ops review that we run every couple of months now for how's our automation and orchestration running.
Sure.
And so we look at the load of all of our estate. So we have effectively a Grafana to pull that in. And then for things that aren't needed perhaps after midnight, or they've been running so long there's no impact, we can move some of those asynchronous workflows to times that's more optimal for the system. So some of these, yeah, you can't get away from customer notice and you just have to put those in the window. Others you can run whenever you want. Others will prevent problems from happening in the first place. We
Right.
always say, what's the easiest problem to fix? One you never get. So,
Right.
do you want to spend more of your time in your workflows on strategy and fire prevention, or do you want to spend more of your workflow time on firefighting? And
Right.
so we look at a number of metrics, put it on times that are optimal for the system
Hmm.
inside of that context of where do we have to notify customers versus not.
Got it. You also touched on one of my favorite topics, IP optical coordination,
Oh,
and and a little in a little different context here.
yeah,
I think many folks get very focused on automating the IP layer, right?
yeah,
But you sounds like you've put some work into. You got people who understand TL1,
that's right.
right? And so, and your team, do you expect, we often, many orgs have a separate optical team from their IP team, right? And
Right,
never the twain shall meet.
right.
Um, but you've had to have everybody engaged in at least workflow definition and then implementation into certain pieces of gear.
That's
You
right.
have, do you have software developers that are embedded in your team? Or do you expect everybody to pick up a little bit to create automations? How do you accomplish that
Yeah,
across the different platforms?
across the different platforms, yeah. So when we stood up that first team that was all dedicated, they were more, we recruited more software developer. They were most of them were more heavy on the software development side. We had a few network engineers that had both good network skills and software development, but
Sure.
harder to find. Those are the unicorns.
Yeah, exactly. Not the standard, not the trad network engineer. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you got it. So we had some of those. And then as we brought in that federated approach, we brought in engineers from transport, engineers from metro, access, IPVPN, voice, old school POTS, and
Woo.
VoIP. Yeah, yeah, go for it. And so the thought was each one of them we would give their own working group areas because we wanted to make progress along all of those technologies. And so when we threw out the 80%, was a bit ambiguous there, and well, it's
Sure.
80%. But we started measuring each individual technology. The easiest one for us to hit, VoIP. VoIP. And
Interesting.
when I wasn't thoughtful about it at first, but it made sense after longer reflection. A lot of the VoIP stuff is already virtualized a bit.
Sure.
And some of them, since it's virtualized, are already better at Ansible, for example. And
Right.
so the VoIP side was the first one that was across the 80% finish line. It wasn't even close. VoIP
Interesting.
did a really good job there. Uh, what's the last one? Let's call out the last one. It's transport, um,
Okay.
because
Yep.
it's TL1 mostly. Now, we did meet early on with some of our vendors and say, look, we want you to help us embrace more Yang type models and
Sure.
start getting more of these APIs. So as we're thinking about this up and down the stack, we can work into it. So as we thought about how we get these workflows to do the various technologies meet, there's enough work inside of each of those. Sometimes they can just be self-contained. So for example, I give you the work protect. That's an easy,
Sure.
pure layer one transport end to end. We've got another one on layer one transport that's pretty interesting. If you think about optical levels in say you have a span from New York to LA, which we operate, we have a huge network.
Sure.
If any of those lasers start to degrade, what do you do? Well,
Right.
historically, you can go in and you can adjust them inside of a specific spec that the
Hmm.
manufacturer has. And we used to have engineers that would have to do that. And so we orchestrated it and said,
Sure.
look, when you get a certain below threshold alarm, just go in and tune all those lasers, update everything. So we did that. So there are some workflows like that, pure transport, but our IP network rides across that same
That's
ecosystem.
right.
And so as you go up the OSI stack, you're only as good as that bottom OSI layer one, or
That's
maybe
right.
OSI layer two or three.
Yep.
Um, so we have been integrating some of those. I'd say the bulk of them are just in their own technology swim lanes, but they all interact one with the other. And we do have some more interesting ones that go across multiple. So because at the director layer, my directors, most of my directors have voice IP transport managers under them. So at the director
Okay.
layer, we continue to get that cross collaboration.
Do you have any need to fire off signaling information for orchestrations that involve optical and IP?
Tell me more. What do you mean by that? The signaling?
So if you see something happening
Yeah.
um, at the optical layer, whether it's dB loss, and you're going to adjust something, or you're going to
Yeah.
force working to protect, is there any? Do you have any scenarios where you need to let something know at a higher level of service that this is about to happen, and you should take other actions in this other networking domain that's not optical
Oh,
layer?
right. Yeah, like at the IP layer or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, yeah, we've got a few things that do that. I'd say most of them don't, but there
Okay.
are a few things. We think of some of the different vendors we use. We think of that as the triggering mechanism, and so once we see that trigger of alarm or
Sure.
whatever, kick off our orchestration, and then based off of the specific technology, we can move things in and out. So as we set up our paths, that was part of the thought process that we wanted. We wanted at the time, we're like, okay, we're gonna have this machine, it'll be AIML,
Hmm.
it's gonna kick off all these workflows. And because that PaaS has access to transport IP, IPVP, and voice VoIP, we can manipulate all of that stack as needed based off of
Sure.
that input signal. So to your exact example, that's effectively that long-term vision of having an AI ML system watching our network
Right.
and hitting all those various stacks in an optimal way to do what we need.
Well, so you brought us back to that topic then. You talked about early on having some experience with ML mechanisms, and now
Yeah,
fast forward to 23, 24, 25. There's lots more going on from an AI and using, chat ops and related
sure.
modes. What has that been like for you, and where are you going on the chat ops? Are you a full vibe ops shop now? I'll let you
Ah,
comment on that. Some friends of ours are using that terminology these days.
yeah, interesting. So yeah, our thought and kind of where we're at, we wanted to have an AI ML system be our triggering mechanism for the most part.
Right.
And then we have our orchestrator over here that's going to be our orchestration that goes out and hits it. And so as an input, machine learning into that's fine. The classical predictive machine learning.
Sure.
But more recently, with everything you see, like, I mean, the basic off the shelf chat GPT, okay, it's going to be a chat ops and you're going to be able to interact with the network. I want that to be a secondary way to
Okay.
interact with the network. I want the primary way to be that AI ML machine that interacts with the
Hmm.
orchestrator that can go out and do closed loop automation. So if I have an artificial intelligence, a Gen AI that can help me develop workflows better or help me develop triggering mechanisms better, that's primary one. Primary two was, okay, if that's not working, I need an interface that, just like you and I are talking, that
Hmm.
we can interact with our network both at the workflow layer, at the signaling layer, however we can dream it up.
Sure.
We're a big team shop, and some people use Slack. We use Teams, and
Sure.
so inside of Teams, what we've been working with some of our other vendors on is that natural language interaction. So, for example, I'd like to be able to say, do I see any loss in LA? Just like I said, if there and hit enter, and
Right.
then have it bring up and show me what's going on. And then, are there any, give me a diagnostic capability in this market? And we've built workflows that run specific diagnostics for us. So I
Sure.
want in natural language that thing to know
Yeah.
exactly what I'm talking about and return that to me. So I see the classical chat ops of that. I want that to be my secondary focus, not my primary. I
Right.
want a big machine that's looking at things and hitting workflows and doing all that zero touch.
Yeah.
If I don't have that, then I'll do more of the chat ops to help me
Sure.
upkeep it or interact or just talk as you and I would talk.
I think that's maybe the single largest impactful, useful tool that's coming out of AI today is that natural language interface,
Natural
and
language. Yeah.
everybody's doing something with it, and I'm not to name drop, but just like the specific vendors I've seen in the last
Yeah.
6 months, Meter for managed Wi-Fi and 5G, they've got a
Yeah.
great natural language interface. Nokia is doing it in their data center project. I see Selector, out
Yep.
there talking about this, and that's not a comprehensive sample, right? Like I
Sure.
know many other vendors, just makes sense, right? Um, and then if
Feels
I,
like it. Yeah.
it really does, and it could actually really impact some vendor certification programs
Right. Yeah.
where if
Yeah.
I,
You got to think, is that really needed in today's day and age? It's good.
it's an
Somebody needs to know some of that, but does your
yeah.
operator need to know all the nuts and bolts for that? I'm not sure that you'll need to in years from now.
And does it make it easier for me to bring people into roles if those certification requirements are not as stringent, and the tools are much more accessible? That's
Well,
we gotta watch how this goes, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's all going to change as of June 1st, 2025, but there's a trend here that we should be really watching closely.
Well, if you think back to our discussion on GitLab versus GitHub,
Sure.
GitHub does really good. One of the things we use it for is documentation of code and
Yep.
generating the code. And so we sometimes bring on interns. And
Yeah.
so most interns aren't really great at maybe Cisco or Nokia or Juniper. Um, but if you can use GitHub to help translate between that code,
Yep.
the iOS versus Junos, and document code or generate a little bit of what we're doing. Maybe it's not perfect, but it gets them started.
Yep.
That's pretty valuable. So I see that.
Yeah.
Hey, and then you mentioned you thought that the natural language and the LLMs was one of the two big use cases. Where do you see the other one? Or what's the other top
I
of
may
mind
have
for you?
misspoke. I think it is probably the one biggest
Oh,
use
the
case, or
number one. Oh, I see.
most
Yeah, yeah.
practical and practical and impactful. Yeah.
I see.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you
I'm
see
not
another spot that I should be thinking about that it'll be going there? Or what are you thinking?
well, we're doing some work on very concrete, repeatable use cases that are much more atomic,
Hmm.
like reading a packet capture or
Yeah.
reducing a set of log messages. And this is stuff I'm sure you've already done to get to the point where you are, right?
Yeah.
But showing other NetOps organizations, here are ways to do this without like having to start from scratch.
Right. Right.
Um,
Got it.
but those are getting building blocks out there so people can reuse. So
Yeah, and that's really the whole hope of the community. And as we talk more, I know you're very passionate about that with NAF. But the more that we can get people with these reusable components, so that we can speed up as an industry, that's
right,
just good for all of us. It helps keep us off the Wall Street Journal in the negative way,
for sure.
and
Yep.
hopefully it'll help others as well.
I don't want to put you on the Journal or USA Today. I will never forget. I was testing Cascade CBX 500s
Oh,
in
love those. Yeah. No.
In the Bell Atlantic test lab,
Okay.
and I will. There was a huge another carrier who we won't name that wasn't Lumen, with a nationwide frame relay outage at the time. And it
Yeah.
was on the front page of the USA Today. And that
Yeah.
was my first introduction to, yeah, I don't ever want to be the engineer that caused that. So,
Yeah. That's right. You get nicknames usually when that happens.
exactly. And not once, yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Well, so you're still in your journey. How far along are you, do you think? And what's the I wanted to say what do the next 3 to 5 years look like, but I don't know. That's not fair. What do the next 2 years look like for you?
Next 2 years. Yeah. So orchestration has been our number one mantra for the last 5 years. This year in 25, we had a second close, and that's AI, Gen AI, how we
Sure.
enable more of that, both to help those workflow, because I don't see that workflow going away. Now, hopefully, the AI will make it easier to generate that longer term. It'll help us manage that longer term. But that's the other area. So the next 2 years, I don't see that changing much. Now, how
Okay.
we integrate the LLMs, how we integrate some of the other generative capabilities, how we pivot some of this to the cloud. We have
Mhm.
made a pivot in a number of areas. I see those as top of mind. So I don't see any of that automation, orchestration, Gen AI going away. There are a couple newer technologies that are emerging that help
Mhm.
us with some very unique use cases. So, for example, one that's pretty cool we've been doing some work with is called DAS. That's the distributed acoustic systems.
Okay.
And so what that one is it used to be classified many years ago, in that if you could take a piece of fiber optic cable, and
Mhm.
if you think about the old spy movies where you'd have a laser shining on a window
Sure.
and hearing the vibrations, well, what's fiber optics made out
It's
of?
it's just glass.
The
Yep.
glass. And what are you
Yep.
shooting down at? It's a
Yep.
laser. And so there's some new interesting AI ML type of applications that'll effectively listen to that fiber optic. And so you can use it to help, in theory, prevent fiber damage, intrusion, things like that. That's
Sure.
what the military used it for, was
Yep.
intrusion. And each one of those things have a unique sound print, just like your thumb
Okay.
has a unique thumbprint. So you can, in theory, see at a certain area if it's a tracked vehicle. Military would be
Okay.
looking for tanks. We'd be looking for backholes that are cutting
Sure.
our
Right.
trenches, or people walking. And so you can train the models to do that. So that's one very specific example of how AI and ML technologies that maybe we weren't thinking about a decade ago, we are beginning to think about now. So I think there's going to be more use cases like that, those very unique bespoke ones that come up,
Sure.
uh, that could have some pretty interesting ramifications. But yeah, 10 years out, I don't know, are we all space, satellite, phone? Who knows? Who knows?
Well, I am looking very closely at the non-terrestrial networking
Yeah.
alignment with 5G and 6G, and that's super interesting. And everybody hears a lot about Starlink, but
Yeah.
there's AST. I think is partnering with a couple other
Yeah.
carriers as well, and we're going to see really interesting developments there.
Yeah.
I If I go back to what does your next 2 years look like question,
Yeah.
I hear you. Like I don't think the what changes.
Right.
Orchestration. I think it's the how, right?
I think that's right.
And
Yeah.
what do these AI tools give individual engineers and your whole organization in terms of I can now be the puppet master of different processes that I spin up? We call them agents because it's the cool thing,
Right.
but it's just a thing I can spin up that maybe functions like at the level of a junior network engineer. Maybe they get better over time, but that is going to empower every engineer on your team to do more things. And then, you heard somebody use the term AI boss or
Yeah.
agent
Boss.
boss the other
Yeah.
day. Are you adopting an agent boss mentality?
Hmm.
And I mean, that's something I don't have my head around yet. I get the concept, and I would love to figure
Yeah.
out automate more of what I do.
Yeah,
So,
generative AI is super cool. I think back to, have we approached the trough of disillusionment? uh,
right.
because if you look at we've implemented a number of these, and it is harder to implement. It goes back to when we started the orchestration. I mentioned, yeah, I was pretty naive. Everybody's going to use it. No, you're not really going to use it the way.
Right.
Gen AI has got tremendous capability, and it's being built in a number of tools.
Yep.
And so we put in. I'll share one that we just implemented recently. We have our service diagnostic tool,
Okay.
and whenever a customer calls in, you put in a service ID or an IP, and it runs out and it does a few dozen checks. And a lot of this is built on our orchestration platform.
Sure.
If it's IP, is my port up? Has my port bounced? Detect if it's
Mhm.
running BGP. Is BGP up? Is it established? No, not connected. Is it
Right.
established? Is it bounced?
Right.
Is it a planned activity? Is it a known outage? So is it highly utilized? All these various checks. Some of them are security. And historically, we had a lot of this if then logic to try to say,
Hmm.
hey, here's what we think the next recommended action is. We've pulled in a generative AI model that
Hmm.
takes all of those inputs and gives us what not even an engineer. You just put in the circuit ID, you click the button, and the generative AI will tell you this
Yeah.
is what is impacting your service, and this is the next recommended action or the next three recommended actions. It's
Right.
not perfect, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think driving operationalization of stuff like that, right?
yeah.
And it's going to come in at least two forms, right? Today we're doing lots of, build your own, roll your own, right?
Right.
Playing and
Right.
experimenting,
Right.
and that's great. And
Yep.
don't stop, don't stop, don't stop. But I think we're going to see the vendors, of the infrastructure do more of it. And I think we're going to see these independent
That's
third
right.
parties that can be this, the chat layer or the vibe ops layer,
Yeah.
that can speak TL1 to your optical gear and know how to use RESTful interfaces and Yang models with your IP
Right.
gear and maybe other stuff on the server side and that cross domain orchestration outside of and with the network layer. Like I'm excited to see how that evolves in the next 3 to 5 years as well. So,
Yeah. I think back to engineers often overestimate what can be done in 2 years, but
sure.
underestimate what can be done in 10.
Right.
So I think all that's right. It's just a matter of timing. So are we going to
Yeah.
change a lot of what we're doing in the next two? Yes and no. It's still going to be orchestration. It's still going to be AI. It's still going to be doing generative homegrown AI like that diagnostic that example I gave.
Sure.
But over the next 10, yeah, I expect that to be wildly different and easy to implement, not the
Yeah.
toil that it takes us today as we're still learning, which is fine. That's part of the
Yeah.
journey.
I think there's room for the exuberance around wow, this incredible new stuff that we can do, and for the hey, that's not ready for prime time yet.
Yeah.
Let's insulate or inoculate ourselves against the extreme hype and
Right.
the extreme cynicism and focus on the ball of okay, what is really working, and
Hmm.
let's drive those functions and those products to actually get our jobs done. So
That's right.
uh,
Be pragmatic.
yep,
Pragmatic.
exactly. Well, we got to start to wind this down, but I do want to give you one last chance to drop your wisdom, your ops
Oh,
nuggets. You had a couple good things here that we talked about earlier. So, what if you were going to leave just one or two ideas with listeners on NetOps in general? What
net
are the
ops.
biggest things on your mind?
The biggest things on my mind. So, a couple of items. One, don't under small details matter, and don't underestimate those small details.
Yeah,
Is running huge network operations. It's one. It only takes a couple of small lines in BGP, and you make the Wall Street Journal.
right,
uh,
right,
so those things matter. We had one. We've spent a career integrating acquired networks, and then more
sure,
recently been
yeah.
divesting a few. But the one thing I call it Greg's networking trifecta of peril.
Uh oh, uh oh.
Peril, yeah. So as we integrated some of the networks, we learned these the hard way. But if you really want to see what your network can do, first, just load it up. Load it up with either forwarding train, control plane, build a lot of protocols, a lot of utilization. Just load it up. Second, begin to let it age out. So
Sure.
if you think back to how much network equipment is legacy in a lot of companies, let it age. And then third, start making changes to it. And so if you let your network age, you load it up, and then when you make that change, I think of it kind of like the old engineering paradigm of is it good, is it cheap, or is it fast? You can pick two.
Right. Yep.
It's about the same. If you're doing a lot of network integration and you've got an older network and you're making a lot of changes, try to reduce maybe some of that load or things like
Right.
that. So yeah, small details matter. They will bite you in places you do not. So do your due diligence and then do your best to take some of that load off. So when the changes come, your network can handle it.
Got it. Your networking trifecta of peril just might make the title of the episode. We'll see.
All right,
Um,
cool.
we'll know when this comes out. But
uh,
also from a a leader who's grown and learned over the years. Like,
yeah,
what's your lessons learned? Like, you talked a little bit about making sure that the team gets small wins early on. Has that left you with
moments.
any important thoughts?
Yeah, that's right. Culture matters. Culture matters. People matter. Our networks, yeah, we espouse to have this and aspire to have this great AI ML capable network that's making all these changes. But at the end of the day, who programmed them all? It's all of our engineers. And so having that culture of being innovative, taking risk, I
Yeah.
always say, how do we, I like to be I would say I like to help people live their potential. And so if we're all thinking about how we can live our potential, be more innovative, and
Sure.
take some risk, and have the safety to do it.
Right.
The things we do are complex. And so we need to be a little forgiving. Not saying be negligent, but
Sure.
take some small risks. We're not doing the go to Vegas and put it all on black, but do the card counting type of risk. Um,
I like the card counting one. I'll remember that. That's right. Yeah. Don't go
so
all in on black. Yep.
yeah, yeah. So that's a lot of it. People matter.
Yep.
Just foster that innovative, curious culture, and you can do some pretty amazing things. Give the team
I
some wins too. It's
I
important.
fully support that message. That's excellent.
Mm.
All right, last major feature of the podcast.
Oh,
Somebody recently labeled this the teen noops, oops section of the
oops,
podcast.
oops. Oh,
Um,
okay.
if you do this long enough, like we have,
Yeah,
you have caused an outage, or you've at least seen some really interesting outages. Now, I won't force you
yeah.
into a corner, but do you want to talk about an outage that maybe you caused, or maybe one of the most interesting outages you've ever seen, especially with a global network that's
Yeah.
spliced in lots of other network assets?
Yeah.
What do you got for me? Yeah,
I worked on a number of what we call memory makers, and yeah, I've worked on a number of the ones that did make the Wall Street Journal. Here's one that did not, that I will share, that I was directly involved in, and I can. This was over 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago now. But I always say if you don't create an outage, and again, we're not being too not crazy, but you're probably not doing much.
sure,
Uh,
sure, yeah, yeah,
so it happens, but you got to limit
yeah.
that blast radius. So yeah, maybe 20 years ago, working in enterprise as a network engineer, our enterprise repairer gets a call and says, "Hey, we've got this customer, major hotel chain, I don't even know, they're under massive DOS attack." And this was in the
Mhm.
era where DDoS was all the, just throw a bunch of packets. It's all these interfaces. So we looked at it, and sure enough, all of their circuits across our network, and they had dozens of them,
Ugh.
maybe hundreds, were all saturated.
Right,
Okay, that's kind of interesting. And our enterprise repair didn't know what to do with it. They looked at it, but kicked it over to us in ops. And so we looked at it, and we'd set up something called a null router. And a null
sure,
router is kind of a honeypot. You can put in an IP address. And then what we do is we re-advertise that to all of our provider edge routers, and
right,
then we drop it on the ingress of our network so it doesn't have to go across the backbone, anything like that.
right.
Well, we look at it. We it was a Juniper, as I remember, that we landed on, and so we start setting up some firewall filters. We sniff the packets, and it's like, no. The only thing that's common is this source address that they're coming from. There's too many. We tried a couple of destination blocks, it didn't work. Let's just null route this source IP and see what happens. Okay, let's do it. Well, it was a big block. It was either like a /12 or /14. It was a big
Wow.
block, big
Yep.
block. And so it's like, well, there's more specifics. Everybody will be fine. So we null route it. Hour goes by, nothing's happened much. And the customer calls back and said, hey, we figured it out. Thank you for your help. It was all just our internal people had set Microsoft's update to go at the exact same time. And that's what's maxing out all of our circuits. Okay, no problem. Glad to help. So we back out our changes. So about 2 weeks goes by and we get a call. And the call is like, hey, we had something really odd happen about 2 weeks ago. And we can't figure it out. And it's like, oh, you don't say, what was that? And it's like, well, for about a 1 to 2 hour block, all of the company at the time was called Level 3. I was working for Global Crossing.
Sure.
All of Microsoft's Windows updates seemed to go to your network, and then they all just kind of disappeared for a couple of hours, kind of began to black hole on us. And what we didn't realize that null router was actually exporting all that to the broader internet as well at the time. So we were telling everybody, hey, we've got the preferred route. And then once it got there, we were just throwing it away.
Send it here.
Send it here. And then we're going to null route, throw it away. So it's like, oh, okay, don't say interesting. So we dug into it. And so it was, let me reiterate what just happened. We had a customer call in, say they were under attack. And then we had good intentions, and we launched a massive worldwide counterattack against Microsoft and all their CDN distribution network.
Well, they shouldn't all be on to update at the same time anyway. You should be staggering that, right?
Yeah.
And we can point fingers at other parts of IT, but
right. Yeah, but that was just for the hotel. But what we null routed, that was all of the Microsoft CDN distribution network. And we took it offline for not quite 2 hours. So we learned a lot. It's like, yeah, we shouldn't be able to block that big. We shouldn't be exporting our routes. And then you should only be null routing destinations, not sources.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. I can laugh about it now, but massive worldwide counterattack against Microsoft inadvertently.
Well, you learned, and it's big of you to be open about it here. So thanks a ton. It's been great talking to you. Where can folks find you if they want to follow up with questions or give you a pat on the back?
I appreciate it. You can probably see me at some different conferences. I like to go to NAF. Always appreciate NAF, NANOG. I'm at Internet 2 recently, so you see me there. I always say hi. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well, so feel free to drop me a note on LinkedIn. Love talking more about any of these topics.
Awesome. Greg, thanks for being on the show today. Really appreciate it. And to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Total Network Operations. We appreciate you. We love your feedback. We have interesting things coming soon in 2025, so stay tuned. If you're someone with important things to say about NetOps, or you want to hear what's coming, contact me via DM on LinkedIn or send a follow-up at packetpushers.net/follow-up. Thanks again, and see you next time on Total Network Operations.